Hi, everyone. This is Lori Silverman with episode 11 of Level Up with Lori. Today I'm with Robert, the MetaMaster Vane out of Leeds in the UK. And the title of our show today is I've spent the last 5 years unlearning what it took me 25 years to learn in IT. A little bit about me if you're new to this show, and then I'll have Robert kind of take over with some conversation. I work at the intersection of decision intelligence, strategic thinking, organizational transformation, and business storytelling. So the folks that I look for to bring to my show, and Robert was one of these. There was a post, was it like 3 months ago? Robert, I think it was when you were talking about machine error and you brought in the words human reasoning, and I'm like, who in the field of IT or data architecture or enterprise data management is actually talking about human reasoning? So I'm always looking for guests who are provocative and provoke new thinking for us. So welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
Good, thank you. For those of us who are joining you, we're in a couple-minute delay, which means that I don't yet see you, but you might see us. Please, if you would, kind of like wave your hand, say, hey, this is who I am, hello, and where you're from in terms of your location around the world. And when you all pop up, then I'll be able to join you as well in terms of seeing all of your comments. But feel free as we're talking today to ask us. Here we go. Now I can see us. So I have Susan Walsh is with us already today.
The classification guru.
Yes, the classification guru. So happy to have you, Susan. And for the rest of you, please tell us who you are as well. I can't see how many people are actually with us. So if you can introduce yourself, that is helpful. But Robert, when I saw that post from you, it's triggered months of conversation for us. But most recently, the last couple of weeks, you and I have been posting in a lot of different places what people are saying about that things have changed, right? With the coronavirus, everything is completely different.
Well, that's right.
Talk to us a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Yeah, well, we've been kind of watching the madness, haven't we, really, between us? And yeah, I mean, everything has changed. The world has had this terrible shock, really, this economic shock. But more than that, also a social shock as well.
Yes.
And the all bets are off at the moment. Basically, we're not in the same world that we were in before. That's kind of where we are. And yeah, we've been basically looking at quite a few of the posts on LinkedIn and noticing all the conversations within the data science community, and they still think they've kind of got this all sorted out, but it's a weird situation, isn't it? Because all bets are off, and historical data there just isn't any anymore.
Right. Well, you and I actually came to you to talk about this, right? Because I said, how is it possible? Like these huge data marketplaces, these data lakes that all look at historical data, how is it applicable to today? And you and I even watched a webinar with 4 leaders in data analytics.
That's
one
right.
worked in the grocery store environment, another one worked in healthcare. And I'm like, how can they forecast off of historical precedents going forward when that is different? And you had some comments for me about that.
Yeah, certainly did. And the more interesting thing here is that we're going to go through a huge dip. So I think the UK basically said it was going to have a 14% dip in GDP, which has not been since 1730 or something like that. But then we'll have a bounce back. But then to where? So you can imagine the historical data that people tend to use, certainly within that kind of analytics space, tends to be based on small changes. So you have a basic trend, yeah, and then you're detecting a small change within it, and there may well be outliers, but you can kind of explain those.
Right.
Yeah. So you'll get some data and you can explain it. Yeah, you can kind of explain these things. What happens with everything's an outlier. That's where we are now.
Right.
So all your training data, basically, what use is it? And I've just been seeing, because I'm looking for a new assignment at the moment, that the recruiting companies are just hiring data scientists, and they're hiring data engineers at the moment like crazy. What are they going to do? What can they possibly give us apart from, well, your business has gone. You know, where do we go from here?
I don't know,
It's
but
very interesting.
I would like our audience to also chime in on this. So if you've just heard what Robert has said, feel free to text your comments to us. I just want to tell you who else has joined us. So Tim Kramer from Pennsylvania is with us. Robert Nastpod is with us. Robert, remind me again where you're from. Genevieve is with us, and she's from Sacramento. Lenka is with us from Slovakia. And then I think we actually have someone who joined us on StreamYard. David Doan from Alexandria. I'm seeing a comment on my screen, which is the first time I've ever seen something on StreamYard. So this, I don't know what they're doing with these data scientists and engineers, because as you said, what was is different. To me, it really speaks to the need for statistics, first of all. And
of course.
right. And we don't have enough data, though. And well, maybe we do now that we've been in this for a month, because to me, D-Day was the day that wherever your business started to shelter at home or to stay home. But for a global company, those were all different days, right? So you can't even look at that. You can't even correlate like a particular set of data to what happened in what country at what time, because now to me, it's a mess. Maybe it's a little bit different to you.
Well, pretty much the same here. Yeah, it's all gone completely upside down, really. So it's very strange, because it seems to be that the smaller your business is at the moment. So these small businesses that basically have been struggling for so long.
Yes.
So the farm shops and the grocers and the bakeries and the mills for the flour and all these sort of things, they're all basically going crazy at the moment. Everybody's buying everything for them, and the supermarket chains are they just don't have the right things on the shelves. So all those supply chains are just broken.
Yes.
One of the interesting things here is, how do you rebuild a supply chain from where it is now to where you want it to be, not knowing what the new normal is, and probably not even being able to know what the new normal is for a year or so until you get that historical data that tells you what the new normal actually is. Yeah. How do you do that? So you have to build those relationships back up again.
Correct. And but let's frame that a little bit more before you go into the relationship piece, okay? So the way I've been framing this with people is that there's the now, and the now changes every day, right? So we've been in crisis mode, and some organizations are still in crisis because they haven't been able to get the financials in place for their business to sustain itself, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the next step. The next step for a lot of businesses was, how do we pivot? Right? How do we pivot in the short term? And we all have examples of across the world of businesses who've done some really unique pivots. But to your point, it's been the smaller organizations that have pivoted the fastest. But then, so if this is now, and this is the next step, way out here is the step after next. And the question I have that goes with what you're saying is, shouldn't you be even looking at this too, this like longer term piece, and backcasting to today? Everybody's trying to they're using forecast data, but we're missing this huge other piece as well. So what does that say to the business models of organizations?
Well, those business models may well be broken, because you can't guarantee that your customer base moving forward is the same. And there are well-known high street chains that in the UK that will just disappear from the high street because their business model is completely wrong. And what all that's happened is, these businesses that were slowly declining, now basically have had the rug completely pulled under them, and those high streets will be filled by other businesses, and those businesses will be the smaller, more adaptive ones that serve a local need, and that's just the way it's going to go. I mean,
so, but go back to that relationship place. You were talking about building relationships with your clients, but from a enterprise or a data architect perspective, like, someone might say, well, that's a job of sales and that's a job of marketing. Like, what does that mean to me and the work that I'm doing?
Well, it's a job for the whole enterprise, because you have to build up probably your purchasing relationships with your suppliers. Not all your suppliers will survive this,
right?
And these relationships are built up over time. So your supply chain is built on relationships between your partners. Yeah, and if your partners are struggling and cannot grow the same pace that you can, or possibly are growing faster than you, and you literally cannot help them grow, then there may well be different contractual relationships that you have to put into place, and different suppliers and more suppliers than normal. We just don't know this yet because we haven't actually gone through the process of rebuilding those supply chains. But what we do know is that the supply chains that are local appear to be working.
So what does that mean to like machine learning? What does that mean to the algorithms we have in place? Help me to understand what the implications are to the industry that you're a part of.
Well, I'm kind of part of the data management industry, but I know obviously a fair amount about the other side of it as well. Well, all these algorithms are based on solving a certain problem with a certain set of training data, and that training data is something that shows you a position in the data that you basically are aware of. It's a historical set of data. You then basically try and match that to a new set of data. Now, if the new sets of data coming in don't correspond at all with the training set, because the training set was 3 months ago before this all happened, and everything now is completely different, all you're going to get is outliers. So your algorithms will pick out the small percentage of match, and the ability to actually make predictions on those algorithms is just going to disappear, because you just don't have that level of conformity that you had before, because the data has completely changed. So I can't see at the moment how data science and machine learning and data engineers are going to make much difference at the moment. I almost feel like you should stand them down for a while until this rights itself, and go back to that more intuitive business people feeling, let's communicate with our suppliers, let's try and build those relationships back up, and let's try and build this thing back up together, because I don't think the data is going to give you much at the moment.
Well,
I can't see it.
Well, I would be interested, for those of you who are listening, and then Tom Grades has joined us from Australia, is to hear what our audience thinks about what you've said. So if you have some comments and you wanna share yours relative to what Robert has mentioned, I'm with you. I have well, first of all, I've always believed that intuition is useful. It is a form of data, and you know so we have to, at this point in time, people are saying, well, we have to become even more data driven, and I'm like, how are you going to be more data driven? I mean, you're saying the opposite. You're suggesting the opposite, that what we need to do is we need to focus more on the human element. And to me, what I've said to people is that data and intuition together form human reasoning. And you've said some things about that too, right?
Yeah. So what we need to understand is that the data we have is what we record in systems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that is not a full knowledge set, and there's quite often a conflation that we have within technology circles, which basically says, and this whole theory, this whole industry about knowledge graphs is basically making that worse. Is that it's what we record in our IT systems, our IT estate basically is our knowledge. Well, it's clearly not. It's clearly not. There are many different sources of knowledge. It's in people's heads, it's in how they interact, it's how they communicate, it's all the offline stuff they do, it's in conversations that basically never get recorded.
Right.
Yeah. So not all knowledge is recorded as data, and this is the issue that analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence has anyway, because knowledge is wider than data. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that also means that knowledge is tribal as well, because the various people in those different functions have little bits of the puzzle basically in their area. Yeah. And business generally grows as an evolution of those little knowledge pools.
Yes.
Yeah. So So we're doing quite well here, but we want to be able to fix that. And the knowledge of that area is then basically converted into a requirement to do something better. The technologists then basically get involved and mess it all up, but that's another story. As an IT insider, I'm extremely frustrated with the way that IT basically approaches all this. But that you have to have understand that there are these little knowledge bases out there. I call them hierarchies of purpose.
Okay.
So these groups of individuals that basically know how this whole thing works.
Right.
And these are the people that you've got to leverage now, because when you have a problem of this magnitude, that knowledge you have to pool. You have to make sure that you actually leverage that knowledge, and it's these people that are going to be on the phone to the suppliers, and it's these people that are going to be who are going to be getting your manufacturing going again and making sure that the machines that you bought for this will work for that, and all these sort of things that are just not recorded in your databases. And it's these human aspects that are going to make businesses survive moving forwards at the moment.
Well, but I
It's
think
not the data.
absolutely. And I want to raise a couple of comments that people have said, but then I want to come back and say, is it just now? Is it just now that we need this? Or do we also need to think about it going forward? So, what Robert Naspat has said, he goes, I see what Robert says in commercial enterprises, but I see the opposite in governments. Robert, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. Susan says she believes that you're spot on. He does go on to say that the municipality needs more data to be able to determine how to approach next steps in the current crisis. In the Netherlands, tax authorities also want to help people in trouble because of COVID-19 by lowering their tax amounts. But I don't think we don't have precedents for that though either, right?
Do we need analytics to basically say we need to help people and lower the tax?
Wow. Yeah, I know it. Well, thank you. Thank you.
But I guess government departments are kind of slightly more sort of sheltered from this sort
Right.
of situation at the moment. And yes, government departments are also ramping up to tackle this situation, the actual pandemic itself. So yes, that they kind of have a natural advantage over the companies that they've just shut down in lockdown, basically, because the government doesn't lock down. The government stays active. So yeah, I'm not sure how you can actually how you can compare central and local government against the commercial sector at the moment, because it's a different. They're in a completely different situation.
May I ask a question of you? Because Tim Kramer is asking a question. He said, how would you recommend bottling the tribal knowledge and storing it so that when the tribal knowledge is gone, it can be understood and reused by others? It's always been the problem in IT, right, where we rely so heavily on people that it becomes difficult when those people aren't available.
That's very true, and this is one of the areas that Laurie, that basically you can excel at, because
Yes.
this is because now you're heading into you're heading away from technology. You're heading away from data people who basically just deal with all this data and databases and all this kind of stuff, and you're heading out of that into business architecture and organizational architecture, and that forward thinking, more intuitive sort of human feeling disciplines, which I think to a certain extent they have been overrun somewhat, she would say, by this IT machine that's spooled up basically and sells people applications and big data and artificial intelligence and all this kind of stuff. Whether they need it or not, they'll sell you it. And there's a whole.
May I comment on that before you
Yeah,
go
yeah.
further? If that's
Yeah.
okay, my apologies for interrupting you. So I think that, and I'd love for you to hear a comment on this. There are a body of tools, and Robert knows my background. So I have expertise in organization development, and I'm also a strategist and futurist. And one of the things that I have been screaming about for the last 18 months is, where are people like me in all of this?
Yeah.
We know how to help you form communities of practice. We know how to help you form knowledge management systems that are human story based. We know how to actually create the mining of those stories so that you can codify that tribal knowledge. We know how to do that. And we've been doing it for years and years and years in the organization development industry. And I think that, to your point and to his question, we have people like me have been removed from organizations. There aren't a lot of us anymore. And my question has been, and you and I have been working on this, is when are people going to bring folks like me back? When are you going to have us partner with IT or data architecture or enterprise data management? Because it's not just right now. I think it's even when we get, well, here's my dilemma, I think, with this as a futurist is I don't think we're going to a new normal. I think there's a next normal, as McKinsey says, and a next and a next and a next. And
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to be able to level set as we have been able to do the last 5 to 10 years for a very long time. So I know
Yeah.
that's a lot for you to
Years.
chew on, but please comment on that.
Yeah. So this is an interesting one because I spent 25 years basically as an IT insider. Yeah. So I started as a programmer, and I've been a database administrator and loads and loads of roles. I've been freelance for the last 20 or so years as well. I'm not going to say how many because that would reveal how old I really am. But yeah, it's been a long while. And I guess over the last 5 to 10 years, I've been in those more strategic roles. So I've been in the enterprise architecture space, and I had a lot of hope for that discipline. It's very similar to the organizational architecture that you're talking about.
Right.
In theory, it's that different level. So it's the point where, in theory, if you raise yourself away from the IT crowd, enterprise architecture can start make real holistic difference. Yeah. But it's been dragged back constantly, and there's these two schools of thought that have emerged, which is, enterprise architecture is all about IT, and that's the one that's sold in basically by the IT machine, and enterprise architecture is all about business and all those other things. And there's a number of people within that discipline, and there's been a war of words, literally, since I've been on LinkedIn, of these two schools of thought basically arguing about what enterprise architecture is. But the way I see it, IT can basically sort itself out, because there's an industry that basically is so huge, and it will sell ice to an Eskimo. Basically, it will literally just basically keep selling and selling, reinventing itself. And it will do that constantly. So there's this whole almost like negative cycle. Well, I call it a negative cycle because I don't actually like it, but this whole cycle of reinvention that's going on and on and on and on. So the next wave comes out. The next programming language comes out. The next set of fabulous methods comes out, and it's just this endless cycle that never seems to end. I saw enterprise architecture as being the saviors there. There's been like the Jiminy Cricket of architecture, but it never really seemed to get there. And public suit was buried in IT too many times, and a lot of big consultancies were selling in enterprise architects just literally to sell their application suites. Not, it just didn't work out. But I think a set of and there's been quite a few people on LinkedIn that have actually started moving towards the more business side.
Right,
so,
which
saying,
is where folks like me are.
So saying, enterprise architecture is dead, needs to reinvent itself, and they're saying, well, actually, we need to get more business focused. Well, that's great, because then it will move it in your direction. But more than that, I actually think that there's whole areas of data. There's been like a land grab, should we say? So there's this whole data industry that's now trying to take over knowledge, and there's a whole data industry that's trying to take over insight and all those kind of more those human aspects, should we say, of information. I actually think that they shouldn't even be looking at those. I think it should be business architects and business analysts and people like you that are actually defining those things, because you're close to the business.
Correct.
And they keep people keep saying, oh, there's a huge disconnect between business people and IT people. Well, I actually think that's manufactured in many ways.
Well, stay there for just a second, because you're getting a lot of comments here. So
Okay.
I want you to hold on that thought, okay? So Robert was saying something about how to determine how and who is at risk. You need models and data. Derek Belia, who's joined us, who said you might use analytics to determine who should get government's help and how much. And then Robert Nostad said he has a question for you. Do you mean do you mean we only need business and information architecture and no application and system architecture?
Well, that's an interesting question, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because for the last 4 decades or so, we've been following this application-centric mindset. So we've gone through. IT has basically formed itself into this application way of doing things. So vendors sell applications. They then lock them down. So basically, they make sure that you keep them, and then we have other applications, and we have all this integration spaghetti, and there's whole industries that have grown up around maintaining that status quo.
Mm-hmm.
But there were a number of other ways of doing this that didn't quite launch themselves well 20 or 30 years ago. Quite a few model-driven techniques and computer-aided systems engineering techniques that found themselves with a great idea, but without the environment to thrive. Now, the reason why they couldn't thrive is there were a number of things that weren't there yet. So, for example, networks of today, 4G broadband, yeah.
Right.
The connectivity problem has gone. 5G, it'll be even quicker, yeah. Yeah. The internet and the browser has created almost a universal way of presenting data and applications to the world. So whereas before you had all these client server applications, you had to download it. It didn't work on that desktop. It didn't work on that, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Now you can do everything with it. Now you can do everything with a browser.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have all this technology, all this foundational technology, this fabulous stuff that has opened these doors to a more business modeled way of doing things. So you define what your business language is. You define what your work patterns are. What your communication protocols are, and all those sort of things. You define those as models, and then you effectively generate out your system. Now that doesn't need IT most of the time. I mean, there will be need for IT for the really complex stuff. Yeah, there will be bits and pieces that you have to bespoke code. But if you imagine what an application normally deals with, apart from the 5%, which basically is a bespoke process that basically does something good for you, most of it is just capture and store. So you have a screen, you capture information, you store it in the database.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, why should we need a set of coders to basically do that when a business model would say, well, this is my information structure, this is how I want it to look, generate it out.
Right, exactly.
And there's huge areas of IT that basically are just there to make IT needed, effectively.
Well,
it's like a perpetual need.
Yeah, but need by whom? And you're getting a ton of comments here, so I have to read these to you. So Tim says, thanks for the insightful comments. He's going to jump off to another meeting. Julia,
hi, Tim.
Pekka Justin, I don't know how to pronounce your last name, Julia. I'm so.
Oh, it's JP. JP, is that JP?
Okay, JP. Yep. She says, "What do you think of the single most important task of enterprise business architecture in the context of information management within the next 5 years?"
Okay, I think the biggest task for me is to refocus on language, communication, flow, and model-driven business systems, basically. So it's taking all the IT out taking most of the IT out of this process, and everything that we can model, and generate out and is quick, adaptable, business-driven, low code, based on established business language. I think that is the way to go. And I think that's the only way to break that cycle. Break that continuous IT reinvention cycle. And we have this application It lasts 8 years. Then we create it with almost an identical application, and then we moved the data across to that. But we can't move all the data because actually that one's not quite the same as that one, and the project ran out of money. So all the nice stuff that we were going to do, actually we didn't do. So you have this almost like curve that just goes downwards and downwards and downwards, and you may get some more features and everything, and it costs 10 million to do it.
Right, but we're allowing the applications and the technology companies to dictate.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I'm hearing through all of this. And you have more questions, by the way, so I want to get to these. And I think that I agree with you. We have to stop that cycle. We have to start thinking again. I think that's where human reasoning comes in. I want us to start thinking again about how does this business actually operate, and what's the implication of that. Susan Walsh says, I don't think there's a huge disconnect between business people and IT people, but there is a huge communication problem in most organizations. Oh, you're going to love this because they don't speak the same language. And I know that you want to comment on that.
Yeah. Well, do they have to speak the same language? You have to be able to translate the language, but they don't have to speak the same language. It doesn't make sense. So if you look at a global organization, and there are 50 departments and loads and loads of sub-functions within them, can we make them all actually use the same words? Is that actually viable? Because that's not normally how we would deal with that problem. If you get two individuals, one, say a French person, and somebody who doesn't speak French, you would get a translator.
Right.
You would get an expert to basically do that translation and say, this over here that you know about is that. Now, the other thing here as well is that when all those different areas are talking between themselves, that they don't want to use a different language that they don't normally use. They don't want to adopt somebody else's language to have a conversation that they can have in their own language. It just doesn't make sense. They should be able to use their own language, and everybody else use their own language, but have a translation mechanism in the middle. I mean, that's basic. It's a glossary, it's a thesaurus, it's a structural catalog that basically sits in the middle and does that translation for you. So does that answer your question, Susan Walsh?
We will find out from her in a few minutes. Derek Bellia has said, it's become the job of the professional business analyst to bridge the communication gap between business and IT. And by the way, I agree with this. I speak a lot
That's great.
Analysts.
That's great. Yeah.
I do. Trouble is that management in many organizations have not, I'm going to take this one on, have not given BAs the power and responsibilities to do their job effectively. So allow me to interrupt you here.
Yes, carry on. You're probably going to say what I'm going to say anyway, but carry on.
I don't know. I'm actually speaking at the Building Business Capability Conference this October, and I'm doing the spotlight session for the IIBA. And it's about stepping up and stepping out. And if you are waiting for the power, you're going to wait forever. I mean, I will be talking about what I believe is the future role of BAs relative to everything that Robert and I are talking about today. I think they are primed for a perfect opportunity to become those translators and to help in a variety of different ways. And so that's my perspective, but you tell me what you want to say, and then we're going to go on to a bunch of other questions because people are really hopping here. I love it.
So yes, I agree with you completely. Is all I'm going to say. So I've actually over the last, you may have noticed on LinkedIn, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been trying to reach out to the business architecture community with that exact message. So to say, look, there's whole areas that I think basically what you should be doing is stepping up and doing this, but because you're not doing this, people who in theory probably shouldn't be doing it are filling the void, and they're going to basically grab that land.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're going to lose that power struggle, and if business architects and business analysts don't win the who looks after knowledge game, I personally think they've lost the battle completely.
Yeah, me too. Well, what I've been saying, and you were part of my show last week where we introduced the latest iteration of our collaborative data-informed decision-making framework, which we call making smarter decisions with data. And that to me is a process. It's a collaborative process that has to involve a lot of different players within this broader scope that you're talking about. And I keep saying, who's going to facilitate that? And if people are saying, oh, I have to get permission from my boss to do that, that's crazy. You just have to step in and do it. Do it. And I think this is true for anyone that we're talking about. The way I look at it is that the IT community, the data science community, talk about land grabs. What they've been doing is trying to slam the door shut on these other professions and not let them in.
Definitely, 100%.
You know, I never see in a data science pictorial or visual any role for the other people that you and I are talking about. And I tell people I've inserted my foot in the door and they keep slamming it on me. And I'm like, somebody else, a whole bunch of other people got to put their feet in the door to hold the door open. And then we have to go forward with it. And I'm not a business analyst by background. Again, I'm a management consultant. I'm a strategist. I'm an OD expert. But all I know is we have to work for the good of the organization. And who is going to help people translate? And who knows the business of the business, the whole totality? So maybe you want to comment on that, and then I'll give you some more questions from our.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because one of the things that the kind of the data industry has specifically, and IT in a number of ways, is they have all this science behind them. So they, which is true, they have lots of science behind them, and it's a kind of a moral high ground. Yeah. And I did actually have one conversation on LinkedIn a little while ago, but around this subject that basically pretty much said that, well, you know, business architects and business analysts, you know, what they do is really not very scientific and not very structured and a bit fluffy, fuzzy and fluffy, which I thought was an interesting point, because I actually think we need more fluffy.
Yes, me too.
I think if you try to control everything and standardize everything and consolidate everything and do everything that way, you'll just end up with everybody basically not liking what they get at the end. But you do need that more human side to it. You need that more intuitive side to it. The set of people that are basically looking at the fuzzy bits, looking at the sociology, the culture, the politics, and kind of resolving all that stuff. And the only way you can do that is to actually, again, you need to be able to say that tribes exist.
Right. What I would add to that, the psychology of it as well. So there's some more comments here. Robert Nast Pod says, this sounds like domain-driven design. And those principles are based on the data mesh. And he says, everybody talks a domain business ubiquitous language. I mean, so I don't know if he's suggesting that we all move to one language, but I think I prefer what you're saying. I would rather we allow people to talk their own language and find a mechanism and a way. And I know that this is what you've been working on, to just help them connect between each other, because it makes it easier on the human. Most people don't realize I have 2 graduate degrees, and one's in counseling psychology. And so I'm continually thinking about, are we making this easy for people? Are we doing things the way the human brain is designed to operate? Because right now, what you've been describing, others have been doing over the years, is the opposite of how the human brain has been created to work. Now, you can choose to fight that for the rest of humanity, and you'll have huge fights.
Well, that's what I see.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting, and my response to the I'm not sure if it's a gentleman or a lady that basically made that comment. But you can do all this without any kind of. You don't need a data mesh. You don't need a data fabric for this sort of thing. This is basic terminology management. This is managing language and communication.
Which are human tasks to do.
Yeah.
And Tom Graves says a key role for the enterprise architect is to act as a translator between domains. I would say to Tom, there's a lot of people who should be playing that role. You might want to, I mean, we've been saying it's the business architect, the business analyst. He's adding the enterprise piece.
Well, yeah, only in terms of the enterprise's architecture. So, and again, this is another thing. This is another thing that where there's somebody on LinkedIn. I tried to basically copy him into some posts, but for some reason he's one of those people that basically when you do an @name, his name never comes up because it's structured quite. I've been trying to get. But there's a guy called Stephen F. Hefner, and he's got one of the best definitions of what enterprise architecture should be. And I'm not gonna quote it because I couldn't find him to find it, unfortunately. But he's saying there's basically three killers of EA. To kind of sum it up, one is thinking it's anything to do with strategy. Two, the thing is anything to do with solutions. And the third one I couldn't remember because I couldn't find his definition. But you get the point. You get the point. So when an enterprise architect deals with architecture on a holistic level, then they have a place. They have a I hate calling it a niche, but they have a place in the world where they can add value. When they start reaching out and saying, specifying solutions, and this is what your strategy should be, they're not qualified to do that. They shouldn't be. They shouldn't be doing that. They should be saying, this is what we want the solution to look like. This is how we want you to form it. These are the rules. These are the principles. These are the holistic principles that we need solutions to do. And if enterprise architects went the other way, went to the kind of the business focus school of thought, you would say, there'll be a lot more holistic capability across an organization. So there'll probably be less applications, more workflows. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
There would have been choices made.
Yes, but it would have been based on conversation.
Very true. Yeah.
I mean, it might have been based on other things too, but I'm just saying I'm just trying to figure out, that the human element and how does that get brought back into here? Because I think that's your earlier. I'm trying to connect the dots. So Susan Walsh says it's not all about language. The business side can't always explain what they want in a way that IT understands, and there's not always a translator. Well, why don't we? Huh?
Well, you should get one then.
Right. That's what I'm going to say. Is just because it doesn't exist doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. And again,
exactly.
Like me with OD backgrounds, that's what we were honed to do. So what I have to ask you is, how many of you who are listening in are bringing in organization development experts like Robert and I are doing today, and we're partnering on this, and we've had tons of conversations to actually help you do this work. So I would suggest to you you're missing a function. That'd be mine.
That's true. That's true. Or a set of individuals are basically. You can't tell a business person what their business language should be because it's their language. But you can instruct them on how techniques to describe what that language is. So how to get to better verbose definitions of what certain things what certain things are. How to use the verbs and the nouns and the construction blocks of language to actually get to a better definition of what each of these things are. You will never basically agree what a customer is between everybody. That's too high. Yeah. But you can agree basically what a postcode is, and what a postcode or a postal code or a zip code is. You can agree that quite easily. Yeah. Right. So you need to stick with the immutables, and various industries will have their own distinct list of things that basically they have to add to that sort of overall glossary, but they can define these things if they have the rules and the mechanisms to basically make those definitions as non-ambiguous as possible. And my co-founder of the method that we do, John O'Gorman, he's the one that basically introduced me to the disambiguation specialist role. Mm-hmm. So this is somebody who deliberately goes in and works through that kind of problem. So how do we make this definition as non-ambiguous as possible? Which words do we use to make sure that we have the most common, understandable definition for that thing? And how do we make sure that we don't define it in a way where something over here and something over there with the same name that aren't actually the same thing come up with the same definition? How do we differentiate the many to many, the multiple of multiples things,
right
problem? And there are techniques to do that, but that's something that data people generally don't get into, because they basically say what it's called in the database is what we're going to call it. Or the label given on the database or the screen. They think the technology is the truth. Right. But actually, generally, most of the time, the technology is something that's designed by somebody who doesn't know your business. who will design it to be a least common denominator of all the businesses they think should basically do that thing. If you understand what I mean there, yeah. So it's always a compromise. So I don't understand why we're believing those definitions,
Well,
because they're not your definitions.
right.
Use your own definitions.
Well, and that's part of the challenge that we have. I know that this show is doing well because I have people saying I'm maybe we should just agree to disagree, and that to me is exactly what this show is about: is to provoke
Excellent.
thinking. I know you and I are on the same path here. Tom says a key catch is that while there is a huge need for architecture, there's an even greater anti-want for it. Linking things together breaks too many power games, and more to the point, how do we resolve that anti-want for architecture? I see it too, because in my organizational, you and I were saying, is organizational architecture the way I describe it the same thing as enterprise architecture? And for some people like Tom, I mean, he and I are probably pretty closely aligned, right?
Yeah.
But how do you get over this issue, what he called the anti-want for the architecture?
Okay, so the reason why there is this anti-want is, again, we're back to root causes here. So when when somebody is perceived to basically be in an ivory tower and making everybody standardized to the same thing, you will get a resistance, a human reaction, which says, well, I don't want to do it that way. So you can't, and this is a construction here. This is all about a construction issue. If you don't let those tribal behaviors be what they are, if you don't serve those tribal behaviors, all you will meet is all you will get is resistance, and any strategic initiatives that you have will just go to the bottom of the pile, because they'll say, well, we're not going to deal with that. So you have to be able to deal with the tribal needs in a holistic way. I know it sounds counterintuitive,
No,
but
it doesn't to me, because I think about this whole issue of co-creation.
yes,
To me, to see, this is where the OD profession, I think, comes in. It is a co-creation, and how do we collectively work together in a collaborative manner to figure this out? And so when I'm doing architecture work, and I started doing architecture work in 1988, so I will probably date myself here, more than 30 years ago, it was never about forcing something on someone. It was saying, here's what we have. Is this what you want? Here's what we have. Here's what you want. And if you don't really kind of like it, then how would you, as an organization or business, like to shift it or change it or adapt it or be? But we never allowed external influences like applications to make that decision for us.
Yes, and this is an interesting switch that's basically happened over the last 30 years or so, I guess, because this IT machine basically has become extremely powerful.
Right.
And the I've even had situations where dealing with a very large German ERP manufacturer that I won't mention, company with 3 letters in its name. The consultants that basically are brought in to sell that are actually saying, no, the business needs to learn the SAP. Oops, sorry. Whoops, sorry.
That's okay. We're okay.
The business actually needs to adopt the lexicon of that application over and above their own. I just saw red mist when I heard that, because no, actually, what we're dealing with here is actually 10 applications, 10 business areas, all sharing data. Yeah. So why should we all basically adopt one when these people, that calls it that calls it that? They're perfectly entitled to do that.
Right.
Again, this is a translation mechanism that you need to get in the middle. If you try and force people to speak, to do the same things, speak the same language, behave in exactly the same way, and not be able to express effectively the fact that they have their allegiance to their business function and want to do things the way they do, that business function needs to happen, because other people might not understand. They might not have the knowledge. They might not have the industry knowledge or the skill to realize we do this for a good reason.
Well, but I have to tell you something. What this just dawned on me. We keep harping from a values perspective that diversity and inclusion are important. But what you're describing is how a fundamental part of the business doesn't actually imbue that in its DNA, in its daily work practices. And it's just an aha kind of on my part. And so I think that, to your point, if we say that this is important, then we have to figure out a way to meet people where they are. I am
Yeah,
very tired of people trying to manipulate everyone to do something a particular way, when it would be a whole heck of a lot easier just to meet them where they are and find a way to co-create together. Let me give you more
exactly.
comments here because there's more to it. Someone was agreeing with Tom in the data science area. World IT is often seen as the enemy. Robert says, to add to Tom's comment, and I'll just read you a couple of these. How do we sell architecture to those stakeholders? Tom says, we need more fluffy. We're right back to the old CP Snow, two cultures problem, getting the right balance between science and art. And I would say, is it even a balance? Is it an integration? Because it's a different.
They need to coexist. So,
Yes, mental model.
so there are some things that you need to do from the top down. Excuse me, a little bit of tickler. And there's some things you need to do from the bottom up. The science is really good at the bottom up.
Yep. So Yulia goes on to say, I like what you just said, Lori. There is a need to democratize business architecture. Tom goes on to say, many other people should be doing that job of translation. Strongly agree on that. Yulia adds to it. We just have a ton of comments here. I love this. Make it close to business, use business language, and do it for humans. A lot of enterprise architects talk in a way that almost nobody understands, but would not admit to it.
Well, that's excuse me. That's very true, because they've been tilted towards the IT.
Correct. Exactly, the same lexicon. Tom goes on to say, and Scott Taylor introduced himself, but Tom goes on to say, techniques that describe what a language is, construction blocks of language, the immutable. That's the meta part for translation, isn't it? And disambiguous specialist role, strongly agree that that's key to much of this.
Yes, that's true. That's true. So, one of the good things about business language is it's very stable.
Yeah.
So an invoice is an invoice.
Yeah.
And it's been stable for centuries. We basically know what business does. So, excuse me. So within a particular industry, you can lock down a business language vocabulary, both structural and kind of linguistic, glossary. You can lock that down pretty quickly, because if you take away the global stuff, like person, each industry only adds a little bit into the mix. So you can get the situation where an industry expert can create a pretty big and pretty immutable set of business language definitions, pretty quickly.
Well, I'll go a step further on that. I've had the opportunity to work across 25 different industries, and I would even suggest to you that.
Yeah, I'm on 23.
You're close, but what you and I think may both realize is that it's even common across industry.
Yeah.
And across functions within a different industry. So,
well, from my, and this is one of the things I have against these kind of international standards, is when you got loads and loads of standards there, because there's a lot of global stuff that basically is defined in these standards hundreds of times.
Right.
Yeah. And they all define it differently. But a postcode in the UK is a postcode in the UK. Why define it more than once? And that's so. From what I've seen so far in quite a lot of the classification work, at the multi-cross application, cross functional aspect, and cross industry, that basically that we've done as part of getting our method off the ground and proving basically it works, is around about 60% of all definitions are global anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, around about 60%, possibly 55, 60%. The vast majority of the rest of them are related to some kind of industry, so to commerce or distribution or manufacturing or something like that, and very few are enterprise specific. We're talking 1 or 2%, modestly. No, most of them. Now, that's if you focus on the business language, and the business language is basically what we use to communicate. If you then bring in a technology lexicons, that's incredibly difficult to reconcile, because technology brings in all sorts of non-business related terminology. So the idea is certainly in terms of the way that I approach this, is to separate those out.
Mm-hmm.
and say the technology language only existed in the area of technology.
Correct.
Yeah. And the business terminology basically sits, and the thesaurus that wraps around that to say this particular way of describing it here is the same as that. So a work order over here is a production order over there. It's the same thing, but we record the context.
Yes.
So we know exactly physically over there, call that. Physically over here, call that. It's the same thing. Yeah. So that kind of active thesaurus, that active lexicon management facility is what can bind that all together, and you can have the purchasing and the sales and the marketing and the finance all using their own language, but relating together.
Well, and then what they can do with that, as you and I've talked about, is then they can do the decision making that we're encouraging everyone in an organization to do, because they will be, and that it helps to facilitate the decision making process being more local. So stay with that while I give you some more comments here. So let's see what I have here. Tom goes on to say disambiguation includes gaining the right balance between sameness, easy to go fit in databases, and uniqueness, which people are better at resolving. How do we get that balance right? And just hold on this. Garrett says one important root cause for the control orientation of IT is that they have responsibility for 24/7, 99.99999 uptime, and they are running systems that are inherently fragile. This means that they will strongly resist incursions into their area of responsibility.
Well, every function, every tribal resists incursions.
Yeah.
Not just IT, every tribal.
Right. Yeah. And then Derek goes on to say another part of the equation is that the top level decision makers are often detached from the front line. The world is about manipulating data and opinion, fluffy stuff. And too often data takes precedence over opinion, particularly if the opinion is not what the exec believes or what they want to hear. And I'm going to go back
to be honest, that's their choice because they're directing the organization. If a director doesn't want to believe what you say, it's up to them. They are directing the organization. They will fall on their own sword.
This last week we covered that. For those of you who weren't in our show last week, in the decision-making process, we actually talk about this. There's a blending that has to happen. And again, this is not an either or. This is about an both and mentality. And you have to be able to blend the two worlds together. And there are ways to do that. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of say that there's another way to approach this, right?
Is that the smarter way?
I'd hope so. We shall see what the world says about that. Thanks. You're very funny.
I'm giving you a plug there. Sorry about that.
Thanks.
That was shameful, wasn't it? Shameful.
Yeah, it was. It was. I don't usually even do that myself. Go on.
What are guests for?
So, with the remaining time that we have left, which is just a couple of minutes, what would you like to leave us with in terms of, I think, really key sticking points that those people who are listening or might re-listen to this afterwards need to keep in mind? Because we've covered a lot of different topics today.
Yeah, I think my main point basically is learn a lesson. Data isn't everything.
Learn the lesson. Data isn't everything. And then what about those 25 years of experience?
Well, as I said, I've been trying to unlearn it for the last 5 years. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Well, no. Tell me the number one thing that you have to that you really do need to unlearn.
Well, I moved to the enterprise scope. So basically, I noticed that most of the techniques that I use worked in very small contexts. So it works very globally. It doesn't scale. So what I had to do is throw out all the techniques and start from scratch. So it literally was a what have I been doing over the last 25 years that actually works at enterprise scale? And to be honest, there wasn't a lot. So it was basically back to the drawing board. If I was looking on the moon, down at the Earth, and I wanted to say classify the Earth, how would I do it? So that was my thought process. Not bottom up. That's about as top down as you can get.
But is that because there's been a lack of systems thinking?
Yes, I mean systems thinking kind of got It's very fuzzy, isn't it? It's a fuzzy thing. It's a BA thing, systems thinking, isn't it? I mean, that's what I studied, systems modeling and systems thinking. Back in the days where SSADM was all the rage. That's aging me as well. So systems thinking is missing in a lot of things. It's everybody's in the nuts and bolts. Everybody's doing everything. I call it science through a microscope. So they're looking down data through a microscope, and basically everything that's around them is not in their scope. So,
well, and I would say that the piece that we need to add to this is strategic thinking, is the ability to, well, because what strategic thinking has that you've talked about today is it has a divergent sense to it. It's all about holding open the conversation and allowing diverse and interesting and unique and different viewpoints to all coexist simultaneously at the same time, and not just make sense out of them, but make meaning out of them. And that there are tools to do this in the fuzzy part of the world. I mean, that's what you're talking about, right? Is how do we bring in some of those things that we start considering? I just want to see if there's any last comments here. Tom says data isn't everything. Strongly agree with that. And Derek says data is at the bottom of the stack in terms of knowledge to wisdom. And that's because what we're really looking for, we talked about last week too, it's insight, right? And that's a human. That's a human. That's another one of those human pieces, right? I can't get an application to tell me what insight.
Because we don't record everything as data. So how could data possibly give us all the insights we need?
Yeah. Absolutely. This has been a remarkable hour. It has flown by so fast.
Hasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it has. If you take a look at the recording, you're just going to see the comments flying across the screen, and I encourage you to do that for anyone. Robert, thank you so much for taking your evening time to spend it with me. I'm in Las Vegas, so for me, it's my middle of my day. I'm going to go have some lunch where you're probably off to get a little bit of rest this evening.
Yes, I might even pop over in a bottle of red wine and have a little bit of relax in a second.
You deserve it after the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you to all of you who have commented and joined us today. Again, this is episode 11 with Level Up with Lori. I'm Lori Silverman, and my guest today has been Robert the MetaMaster Vane.
Thanks, Lori.
Thank you.